And we start with a Fox News alert. Two big issues, foreign and domestic, on the front burner at the White House right now. President Trump set to meet with the Chinese vice premier in his Oval Office at this hour as his administration wages a full court press on tax reform, with Vice President Mike Pence set to deliver remarks later today in Milwaukee. Hello to you. Welcome to the second hour of Happening Now. I'm John Scott.
And I'm Heather Childers. We're also awaiting something big, the White House, the news briefing, and that will be packed as well. That starts just about an hour from now. All of this coming, of course, as Congressman Steve Scalise makes a dramatic return to Capitol Hill.
Emotions running high in the House chambers as the majority whip was greeted with thunderous applause from both sides of the aisle this morning. Congressman Scalise returning to work for the first time since he was shot and seriously wounded while practicing for a charity baseball game back in June. Mike Emanuel is on Capitol Hill, but we begin with Doug McKelway live at the White House on a pivotal meeting that could impact the nuclear showdown with North Korea. Doug.
That's right, John. This high-stakes meeting is set to happen later in this hour. We've got no readout from the White House on the substance of the meeting, other than what we learned early this meeting when Secretary of State Tillerson met with the Chinese Vice Premier Liu Landong early said.
Secretary Tillerson, what are your priorities for your trip to Beijing?
We're going to have preparation for President Trump's important visit, so we want to talk about the agenda for that visit, and then we'll continue our discussions on a number of other issues. Certainly North Korea will be on the table for discussion.
And certain to come up at the Oval Office meeting in this hour, in action to break off all banking relationships with North Korea. That was an unexpected surprise when it was announced last week, which prompted President Trump to applaud the move. He said last week that it was, quote, something that people would have thought unthinkable even 2 months ago. And he thanked President Xi for the move. The president's meeting gets underway at 1:45 this afternoon. We'll let you know what happens. And in other news from here at the White House, the continued push for tax reform. Vice President Pence is the lead man on that today, meeting with businesses and families up in Michigan and later in Wisconsin today. The chief components of the tax cut proposal and tax simplification proposal are a proposal for 3 brackets now, 12, 25, and 35%, a doubling of standard deductions, $12,000 for individuals, $24,000 for couples, and a lowering of taxes on small businesses who use individual tax forms to 25%. And a lowering of the corporate tax rate to 20%. It also includes the elimination of state and local tax deductions. That is going to be highly controversial in many high-tax states, such as New York and in California, where a lot of high-wage earners save a lot of money or make a lot of money from those deductions. This morning, White House Chief Economic Advisor Gary Cohn addressed that issue. He said in the long term, it's going to work out for everybody.
Only the people that itemize today, which are less than 25% of the families in America today, itemize. So they're the only ones that are actually taking a deduction for their state and local taxes. We're solving for the greater good of the country. But what you have to look at is you have to look at what we did in its entirety.
Senator Dianne Feinstein said the elimination of those state and local tax deductions is a, quote, non-starter for her. It's safe to say that there's going to be across-the-board Democratic opposition to the tax proposal because so many of Democratic representatives come from states that are Democratic states, meaning high-tax states. John?
All right. Thanks very much, Doug McKelway at the White House.
Meanwhile, Republicans are trying to come together on tax reform after bruising and divisive battles on health care. This taking place as Congressman Steve Scalise makes a dramatic return to the House floor. This was amazing for the very first time since he was shot and critically wounded at a baseball practice back on June 14th. Our chief congressional correspondent Mike Emanuel is live for us on Capitol Hill. Really was a remarkable scene, Mike, but let's begin with the latest on this tax reform push.
Well, Heather, good afternoon. Key Republicans are out selling this tax reform plan, including the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, the Tax Committee in the House, saying why it's critically important to get this done.
If we want to unleash the vast potential of this nation through tax reform, we have to start by unleashing the individual potential of every American. And we have three key objectives making such a tremendous difference for middle-class Americans.
Meanwhile, top Democrats are attacking this Republican tax plan, saying it would be a deficit buster.
This idea that the administration can pay for a $5 to $7 trillion tax cut through growth is simply selling a bill of goods using fake math.
Republicans counter that their tax plan is designed to help the middle class, those seeking to start small businesses. Expect that debate on either side of the aisle to continue in the months ahead. Heather?
Oh, yeah, those disagreements heat up over tax reform. Let's talk about this, though. The bipartisanship, the hearing from lawmakers. What are you hearing from the return of Steve Scalise today?
Heather, I got to tell you, I was standing here a short time ago when Congressman Steve Scalise went walking by here on crutches. We were told he would likely take a scooter. There's been a tremendous outpouring of emotion from both sides of the aisle after seeing the GOP whip return to the House floor.
Jennifer and I have been overwhelmed with all of that outpouring, and it's given us the strength to get through all of this and to get to this point today. And it starts with God.
An attack on you is an attack on all. We all came through this magnificently because of your strength. So the power of Steve Scalise. The day we came to the floor, when you weren't here, we were Scalise. Today, we are Team Scalise.
Wow. A number of lawmakers told me there was not a dry eye in the House chamber 3.5 months after a devastating shooting. Steve Scalise is back. Heather?
Yeah, it was amazing. He said he was laying on the baseball field or lying there, and that he started to pray, and that he is an example of prayers that are answered. Thank you so much.
As the battle over tax reform starts on Capitol Hill, the spotlight is now shining bright on Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and his relationship with President Trump. McConnell perhaps feeling some heat after failed Republican efforts to repeal and replace Obamacare and the loss of the candidate he backed, Luther Strange, in the Alabama Senate primary this week. All of which has reporters asking the president if he still has confidence in the majority leader.
Do you have confidence in Senator McConnell? Yes, I do have confidence.
Even though he couldn't get
But it's really not up to me, it's up to the Senate.
Let's talk about it with Rachel Bade. She covers Capitol Hill for Politico. So is Mitch McConnell in trouble?
So my read on this from talking to Republicans on the Hill is that McConnell is not in any immediate jeopardy. However, there's sort of this rising anti-McConnell fever right now that it could really be a problem for him in the future. Technically speaking, only Senate Republicans can boot him from that leadership position, right? Not the base, not angry House members, not even the president. And when you talk to Senate Republicans on the Hill, a lot of them are defending him, saying he's doing the best he can in sort of this impossible position. However, as you mentioned, the base is really ticked off, and they're blaming him for the Republicans' failure to deliver on an Obamacare repeal. Also, McConnell just failed, even after spending millions of dollars, to protect one of his Senate colleagues who got booted from office by a primary challenger who ran on a platform of firing McConnell. So he's not in a good position, you could say that.
But the president also backed Luther Strange. It wasn't just McConnell by himself and the donors of those $9 million. So, the president, some of the blame has to go back to the White House, too.
You know, a lot of people said that the president probably could have done a lot more to help Luther Strange if, his heart was really in it, could have done a lot more campaigning for him, been more active. He was sort of doing it halfway, I guess you could say, or a lot of Republicans were saying so on the Hill. I think if you're watching for McConnell, is his job going to be in jeopardy? The thing you have to watch for is when and if he ever becomes a problem for his members back home. This is what happened with John Boehner. There were a lot of people who still liked him up here in the House, but the problem was that their constituents were sick of him cutting deals with Obama, and so they were pressing these members, you need to get this guy out, or we're going to have to question whether we vote for you. So if Senate Republicans start having to deal with constituents who are pressing them to push back against McConnell and it becomes an election issue, then McConnell might have to step aside, right? But until then, I think right now the question is, was Roy Moore's victory running against McConnell sort of a one-off thing, or was this the beginning of a new trend? And we just don't know yet.
It's kind of funny how things turn, because almost nobody expected that Mitch McConnell would have a majority to lead in the United States Senate this time around. It was widely expected that Democrats were going to take the Senate. So McConnell wins, but he's only got 52 votes, which in a body that requires 60 for major legislation doesn't give him a lot of room to get things done without bringing Democrats on board.
That's exactly right. Yes, he needs 8 Senate Democrats to basically get anything done. However, there is a fast-tracking tool that he has also been unable to wield, and that tool lets them circumvent Democrats and just pass something on a majority rule, which is what they tried to do with the Obamacare repeal, and he still couldn't get it done, right? And it's because also the Republican conference right now really isn't one conference. It's pretty much 3 different conferences right now. You have the far right, the traditional Republicans, and then moderates. And trying to get these moderates and conservatives to agree on anything these days is virtually impossible.
Rachel Bade from Politico. Interesting stuff.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Taking up a legal challenge that could financially cripple a Democratic-leaning group. And it's similar to a case that they deadlocked on before. Why the ruling could be very different, though, this time around. Plus, does the GOP have an identity crisis? We're going to talk some more about that, and how Judge Roy Moore's victory in the Alabama Senate primary runoff may be a sign of things to come, and the impact that it could have on the future of the party.
Together we can make America great. We can support the president. Don't let anybody in the press think that because he supported my opponent that I do not support him and support his agenda. As long as it's constitutional.
New information on a legal case involving labor unions, with the Supreme Court now agreeing to take up a free speech challenge from workers who object to paying money they do not support. Justices deadlocked 4-4 in a similar case last year. But now, with a conservative majority, they could overturn a 4-decade-old Supreme Court ruling that allows public sector unions to collect fees from non-members to cover the costs of negotiating contracts for all employees. This could financially cripple the Democratic-leaning labor unions that represent government workers. The latest appeal comes from Illinois and was filed just 2 months after Justice Neil Gorsuch filled the high court seat of the late Justice Antonin Scalia.
Well, right now, concerns that the GOP may be going through what could be called an identity crisis of sorts. With Rich Lowry actually writing this in Politico, Republicans are in robust good health. They have unified control of the federal government and the most governorships and state legislative seats since the 1920s. Conservatives control the Supreme Court, yet Trump's ascendance created an identity crisis in the party that has not been resolved. Joining us now to talk about it, Christy Setzer, Democratic strategist and former national spokeswoman for the presidential campaigns of Al Gore, Howard Dean, and Senator Chris Dodd, and Brad Blakeman, former deputy assistant to President George W. Bush. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks.
So,
Great
Brad,
to be here.
I'll start with you. Do you think that there is an identity crisis, and what needs to be done about it?
No, I don't think we're in crisis. I think we're in challenge. And all we need to do as Republicans is go back to our platform. We make a platform every 4 years at our convention. It's clear. It was passed by a majority of Republican delegates. It was passed by the RNC Executive Committee. And we need to just stay true to that platform. And by the way, every promise that was made in 2016 was not a promise just made by the president. It was a promise made by every Republican. And look, if we can't get our act together holding the majority of the House and the Senate and controlling the White House, then really shame on us. And we really need to come together as a party. But beyond that, in order to get something done in the Senate beyond reconciliation, we have to be able to reach across the aisle and work with Democrats as well.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but you referenced the Senate, and Christy, as I toss it over to you, Paul Ryan had some pretty harsh words for the House. He said that the Senate has passed the House has passed 337 bills in the House as of this week. The challenge we have is this chart, 274 of them are still in the Senate. So they need to be working together between the House and the Senate as well.
They do. That is part of it. You know, I think what's most disheartening, not just to Paul Ryan, but also to the Republican grassroots, is the fact that there's been so little legislative accomplishment. There's nothing major that they can point to, even though we've talked about, Republicans have talked about repealing Obamacare for 7 years. I think it was shocking to a lot of people that, you know, that once they gained power, there was not actually a unified vision on how to do so. So I think that is why you end up seeing anger, not just, again, on the Democratic side, but also on the Republican-based side.
But to listen to Paul Ryan, he says that the House has passed more than Obama did during his time around, more than Bush, more than H.W. Bush, more than Clinton as well.
And so why is it not going through to the Senate? I mean, look, the reason why is because you still have some, you know, a somewhat and very tiny and vanishingly small by the day, but section of moderates in the Senate. People like Susan Collins, who's genuinely moderate, and then other people who actually may not be moderate politically, who are still conservatives, but they're pragmatic conservatives who actually want to see, you know, things work the way that they used to. And so you're not actually going to get their approval on something that, say, is passed without the input of any Democrats. So that is why the caucus is fractured.
Brad, the primary in Alabama, Roy Moore and Luther Strange, what did that tell you since Roy Moore won? What do you think?
I think it's still the year of the outsider. People are sick and tired of entrenched Washington politicians. And that is the message that is resounding loud and clear. And I don't think it's going away. I think we only just scratched the surface. When we reach the midterms next year and every member of the House is up and a third of the Senate, the American people, that's their report card on promises made and promises kept. And Republicans need to deliver. And taxes is a great opportunity because it can be a bipartisan issue. But we got to start delivering.
Yeah, they say pictures worth a thousand words. And there was the images of the last rallies that the two of those candidaats held, and you had Roy Moore there in the cowboy hat with the leather vest and, you know, flashing the gun to talk about rights, and then you had, you know, the button-up long sleeve on the other side with Luther Strange. So that tells a lot as to what's happening. Yeah, thank you both for joining us. Appreciate it.
Great to be here.
Well, the president yesterday pushing his tax plan, saying it will jumpstart the economy and bring jobs back to America. So what are the critics saying? Howie Kurtz joins us and breaks it all down. Plus, remembering the playboy who founded a business empire on a lifestyle, the cultural legacy Hugh Hefner leaves behind.
I tried to put together a men's magazine that would reflect the views and attitudes that I held, and it caught on immediately, and the rest, as I say, is history.
Well, a high-stakes battle looming on Capitol Hill as Republicans begin pushing for tax reform, but the mainstream media already taking shots at President Trump's plan to cut taxes, particularly the impact that it will have on the debt, and raising concern that the tax plan will mostly benefit the very wealthy. Joining us now, Howard Kurtz is a Fox News media analyst and the host of Media Buzz. Thanks for joining us, as always.
Hi, Heather.
So right away, everyone's all concerned about the deficit.
Yeah, if you look at the morning papers, the media are laser focused on the Trump plan blowing up the deficit after not having particularly cared about that when the deficit exploded under Barack Obama. But there's hypocrisy here on both sides. Republicans for years have said the deficit is out of control, and now mostly they've been quiet about a plan that could cost the Treasury $2 trillion. But so far, we don't know all the details. Democrats do the same thing when they're in charge, except they usually bust the budget with more spending rather than reduced taxes.
Yeah, and you just mentioned we don't know all of the details, so the battle's yet to come, the big one.
Yeah, you know, we have a plan here right now which is sort of serving the dessert but not the vegetables, by which I mean, you know, politicians love to cut taxes, one of their favorite things to do, but what the administration and the Republicans on the Hill haven't spelled out yet is which tax deductions are they going to take away in order to at least partially offset the cost of what would be, by all accounts, a very big tax plan. That's going to be a huge battle, and the press really has to stay focused on the substance of who wins and who loses, rather than just on the politics of will this be a win for the GOP or not, a win that they need.
And you always have to have those vegetables to stay healthy.
Indeed.
Maybe not Brussels sprouts, though. So Playboy magazine founder Hugh Hefner woke up to the news this morning that he had died at the age of 91. He was known, of course, as a symbol of the sexual revolution of the 60s, a proponent of free speech, civil rights as well. Also, you don't see him doing it there, but that pipe-smoking silk pajama man. You actually met him, right?
Yeah, I interviewed him at the Playboy Mansion 7 years ago. He was wearing the smoking jacket. And, you know, he seemed like a man very happy with his life, and understandably so. But he also talked about how he was not a fan of the X-rated fare so widely available on the internet. He said he didn't like explicit pornography. He thought it hurt his magazine for sure, but also it hurt society, that it takes the mystique away from sex. At the same time, you know, this guy was an absolute force, whether you liked him or not, whether you liked the Playboy brand or not, in changing the culture when he launched that magazine in the repressed 1950s. The irony here is that a magazine that actually had some good articles and newsmaking interviews over the years, that basically sold pictures of naked women, became kind of passé, kind of tame in the age of the web, where just about anything's available.
Yeah, and I think they tried to do away with nudity for a little while there recently, but then they went back to it.
It lasted 1 year.
Yeah.
Wasn't selling.
What was he like personally, though? What was his personality like?
He was very gracious. He was more thoughtful than you might expect. He had thought more about free speech and the net and sex and cultural mores than I had expected. And there were pictures all around of his various wives and girlfriends. You know, he was a guy who kind of built the empire based on what he wanted, and he was very comfortable with that toward the end of his life.
All right. Well, I know that he's set to be buried next to Marilyn Monroe, who was the first, first on his cover, right? Thank you so much for joining us, Howie. Appreciate it.
Good to see you.
Tensions with North Korea causing concern really all around the world. The South Korean president says his country's efforts with the international community are at the highest level ever. Why our next guest says North Korea is about to act out once again. Plus, the crisis in Puerto Rico getting worse by the day. Supplies of food, water, and fuel cannot reach the millions of people who desperately need them. And the Pentagon just announced it is taking new action.
You've got these containers sitting at the port, and they can't move the aid. So even as the aid comes in, they're having trouble distributing it because they don't have a way to distribute it. They don't know where to distribute it. And they don't have it. Some of it needs to be refrigerated like insulin, and there's not enough power for the generators to protect that.
This Fox News alert for you. At the request of the governor of Puerto Rico, President Trump has waived the Jones Act, which will expedite the shipment of food and water and other basic necessities to the devastated island. But Puerto Rico also needs trucks. They need fuel to get those supplies from its port to the people who actually need them. And now the U.S. military is gearing up to help. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin is live for us at the Pentagon with more. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Heather. Well, the biggest change, as you mentioned this morning, is the president has now waived the 1920s Jones Act for 10 days, which had required any shipments of aid to Puerto Rico be carried on American ships from the mainland. Some say this had slowed recovery efforts. The Pentagon has now also put a 3-star general, Jeffrey Buchanan, in charge of coordinating the federal response in Puerto Rico. We're told he'll arrive in the next few hours. His deputy, Army Brigadier General Richard Kim, arrived in Puerto Rico yesterday to establish a headquarters. They will focus on logistics, which have been stymied by mudslides and failing infrastructure. On Tuesday, the president also ordered the Comfort, a Navy hospital ship, to set sail from Norfolk, Virginia. They will set sail tomorrow. The Comfort will arrive in the middle of next week. This video was shot by Customs and Border Patrol agents Sunday. They told us they hiked a half mile to help the family inside this house. 3 members were in diabetic shock, they said. There are now more than 10,000 federal workers on the ground in Puerto Rico, according to the president's Homeland Security advisor, Tom Bossert. As of this morning, the Defense Department had delivered fuel to 9 hospitals and supported establishment of over 100 points of distribution, including 12 Puerto Rico National Guard armories. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is providing 900 sandbags to shore up the main dam in Puerto Rico. 8 airports are open. 1 airport remains closed. 5 of 6 FEMA priority seaports are open with restrictions, we're told. Shipping containers, we're hearing, are backing up in the port because there aren't enough trucks and drivers. The military is now providing security for those drivers, we're told. The U.S. military has also sent a large generator to help enhance air traffic control capacity at the main airport in San Juan. Heather?
The energy grid been completely destroyed. I think you answered a little bit of this, but the state of the port and the state of the hospitals?
Well, if you look at the state of the port, we're hearing figures of 10,000 shipping containers that are sitting at that port and have not been able to be unloaded because of a lack of trucks, a lack of drivers. There were concerns of security. We just heard from Tom Bossert that, in fact, they're going to be providing security for those drivers. So things are backing up. That's why you're seeing this 3-star and 1-star general going try and really get the logistics organized, because what is happening is they just can't get things moving. So even if the aid arrives, they can't get it to the people. Heather?
Much more island versus dealing with Texas and dealing with Florida, who also still need help. And then you've got the U.S. Virgin Islands. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Fox News alert: President Trump, in just a matter of minutes, will be meeting with the Chinese vice premier. North Korea, sure to be at the top of the agenda. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is on his way to China. Joining us now, former CIA senior North Korea analyst Sue Mi Terry. Sue, the North Koreans are expected to something else, another missile launch, another nuclear explosion in the next couple of weeks. Why?
Well, they were bent on completing their nuclear program, continue to test. But after President Trump's speech at the United Nations, you've seen how Kim Jong-un reacted with an extremely personal statement, which was quite unprecedented. I've been watching North Korea for a very long time, but he has reacted in a personal manner, calling Trump a dotard. And so North Korea has to act because they don't want to look like they are caving on. So I assume that something is coming, although I don't necessarily think it's going to be a nuclear test over the Pacific Ocean. I think it's more likely it's going to be an intercontinental ballistic missile test, perhaps on October 9th. The eve of the party founding day. It's also Columbus Day for us, and also the 11th of since their first nuclear test. So that might be a good day. But even if it's not, I do think a provocation is coming our way.
The president has used some very tough language on North Korea. Fire and fury, has said he will totally wipe them off the map. Are you suggesting that that is not working?
No, I don't. I think if Mr. Trump was trying President Trump to back down, that kind of language is not helping, because Kim Jong-un he has made it very personal. He cannot back down for domestic reasons. He cannot show his elites, his military, his people, that he's backing down. And by the way, Mr. Trump's that kind of rhetoric, it's giving a gift to the North Koreans, because they can just play that message, Trump's message about totally destroying North Korea over, and just tell his people, look, this is what we've been telling you. United States is bent on destroying us, bent on trying to, United States is our major house. And so it's giving Kim Jong-un a talking point. So I don't think it's helpful.
When our president refers to him as Rocket Man or Little Rocket Man, doesn't that diminish his standing in the eyes of his own people?
I don't think so. I mean, yes, it is true that Mr. Trump is making fun of him, but I think it's just getting North Koreans more exercised, and they, to just really calling him personal names like that, Rocket Man on a suicide mission. I just don't think just goading Kim Jong-un in this manner is necessarily helpful, at least in terms of trying to get Kim Jong-un to back down. I think we can be firm, we can be strong, we can take a very strong stance, trying to isolate the North Korean regime diplomatically and financially. We can do that without resorting to this kind of rhetoric. And I would just say it's not helpful, because we're trying to get international consensus, trying to get the whole international community to put pressure on the Kim Jong-un. I don't want to be the one that kind of look like we are sort of being out of the line, or we are being a little bit, over the top. I think that's just not a good approach.
There has been progress as China has told its central bank to stop doing deals with North Korean entities. Deals that were already underway with North Korean companies are being canceled. Is that kind of pressure result in Kim Jong-un backing down?
Well, we'll have to see. China has historically have done, to some degree, but they have never really done enough to put the mass. Is doing more, but I think the key question is to see if how much China is willing to really go along this path, or they're just going to do a little bit more to appease us, Washington, and then stop. So I think that's a key question, whether China is really willing to push North Korea. But ultimately, it may not work, but we have to keep on.
The analysts say the chance of somebody making a mistake and leading to a wider conflagration from some accident are growing by the minute. Sue Mead for your insight.
Thank you for having me on.
Well, still to come, it is known as the Oscars for government service. We are taking a look at some federal workers doing their part to make things better for Americans. Plus, an investigation being launched after 3 workers are killed in a scaffolding collapse at a TV transmission tower. We'll tell you about the shocking tragedy.
Right now, questions on what caused a deadly accident in South Florida. 3 men were killed in Miami yesterday when scaffolding used to reach the top of a TV transmission tower collapsed. The victims reportedly worked for a company that builds TV antennas. A witness says the workers appeared to be near the top of the tower when the scaffolding gave way. The tower is used to transmit the signals for 2 Miami television stations.
Well, here's some new information on a Netflix scam to tell you about. A new phishing scam apparently sends an email to users telling them that their account has been disabled. Well, the email then asks you to update your payment information. The streaming service is warning customers, if you are one of them, that this is in fact a scam. Netflix, they say, will never ask for this information by email. If you receive this email, you should report it to Netflix. Customers who have given out their information are advised to change their Netflix password. Good idea.
Well, we often hear about government officials abusing their power, but that can overshadow the hard work of many federal employees. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen is live with a look at several individuals taking action to make government better for America.
That's right, John and Heather. Good afternoon. These are the recipients of awards known here inside the Beltway as the Oscars for Federal Government Service, a.k.a. the Sammys. The 2017 honorees include Rory Cooper of Pittsburgh, who was paralyzed in a biking accident in 1980 but went on to found the Human Engineering Research Laboratories for the Department of Veterans Affairs. He and his team are credited with 25 patents that have improved wheelchair technology for disabled veterans. Timothy Camus, a Deputy Inspector General at Treasury, helped take down a massive scam involving criminals posing as IRS officers in telephone calls. The Camus team helped bring more than 60 indictments, including against the alleged mastermind of the plot. Courtney Lias and Stacey Beck both work for the Food and Drug Administration, respectively as Director of the Division of Chemistry and Toxicology Devices and Chief of the Diabetes Diagnostic Devices Branch. They fast-tracked FDA approval for the first artificial pancreas device, a welcome development for more than 1 million Americans living with type 1 diabetes. The Sammys were handed out last night in the annual awards gala staged by the Partnership for Public Service at the Andrew Mellon Auditorium. Each honoree was featured in a 90-second video and gave an acceptance speech. Flora Mackey Jordan, a 2012 college graduate and engineer for Marine Corps Systems Command in Quantico, interviewed 600 Marines in the field, observing how heavy body armor impinges on their movements and missions. Something the Corps said for.
And who let me tag along on some of their missions, who kept me alive when we were hiking through the Panamanian jungle, and who really just opened the doors and gave me their feedback and really allowed us to develop the system kind of together for them.
Really inspirational. We'll have more from the Sammys at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Special Report with Brett Baer tonight. In the meantime, follow me on Twitter right now at James Rosen TV. And right after this segment, I'll tell you who the Sammys are named for. John.
And the Partnership for Public Service, what exactly is that?
Yeah, that's a nonprofit, nonpartisan group based here in Washington that's devoted to trying to make government more effective. We see a lot of them during transition periods when they are always giving us the official stats, semi-official stats that we use for how many vacancies there are, how many have been confirmed, that sort of thing. They're also trying to work with the government to modernize their IT systems.
All right, James Rosen in Washington.
Hopefully
James.
no Oscar moment where they announce the wrong winner.
Let's hope.
Yeah.
Thanks, James.
Well, there's some new trouble at the airports to tell you about. What is behind the problem that sparked delays and left passengers stranded all over the world? We're live with those details up next.